is former Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy and the Environment and former Goldman Sachs Vice Chair Bob Hormats. Bob, let's keep in mind that President Biden kept the Trump-era tariffs on China in place for the past 4 years. Yes. That said, we're looking ahead now. Do you see the Trump tariffs as tactical or just paint everything with the same brush?
Well, the point Gary was making, I think, is something we ought to bear in mind. There are specific reasons, and it's in American law as well, that the president has the authority to use tariffs if countries are doing things like dumping in the United States or doing things that adversely affect American security. But the president-elect has been making the point that he is talking about blanket tariffs, 10 to 20% on all countries and maybe even 60% on China. That's a very different animal because that would have an effect on a whole range of American companies, companies that use Chinese parts, companies that source in China to make cars or various other things. And also, if you go into your neighborhood Walmart or Target, it's going to raise the price of all the goods that they import from China and sell to you as a consumer. So for specific purposes, yes. For broad purposes, it's going to be much more damaging to the economy and to the average American.
Sort of the unintended or opposite effect of what the tariffs are supposed to do. Now, the tariffs, Donald Trump has made very clear, would be to help American companies and American farmers. But we have this from the American Soybean and Corn Farmers Association, and they have anticipated, they've crunched the numbers, and they see a huge trade war hit to what they are trying to do to make a living, $7.3 billion in annual production value cost. So how do you get around something like that?
Well, they've raised a very interesting point. The Chinese are not just going to sit there if the United States imposes these huge tariffs and keeps them on there. If they can negotiate, put them on there as a tactic, as a tool, and negotiate some arrangement, that's one thing for a short period of time. If they're on there for a long period of time, the Chinese are going to retaliate. And how would they retaliate? They would retaliate against goods that Americans sell. What do Americans sell? One of the biggest products we sell to China are farm goods. And the farmers have a reason to be concerned about that. But so do a lot of high-tech companies. A lot of high-tech companies sell to China, not for security-related production, but for other reasons.
You've sat across the negotiating table from the Chinese on many levels when you were Undersecretary of State. What's going through their mind right now? I mean, where is the Chinese-U.S. relationship today, and where do you anticipate it will be after the inauguration?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I don't think they do, but obviously they are thinking about this. The Chinese don't like uncertainty, and therefore the uncertainty of all this does sort of rattle them a little bit. But they also are looking at the United States and the big divisions we have and saying, look, our ability, our rise, even though we have economic problems, which they freely admit, our rise in the world is going to be enhanced by the fact that Americans are having these big internal fights. And the other part of the problem is that the Chinese are saying to themselves, we want to be the most influential country in the global economy. And if the U.S. starts pulling back or continues to pull back with no trade agreements and barriers, not just against China, but against a wide range of other countries, including allies, it gives the Chinese an edge up in shaping the new global system. We have to be aware of this. It's not a free good.
Okay, but we also can't ignore the Taiwan piece of all of this. Taiwan is home to perhaps one of the most important companies on the planet, and that would be Taiwan Semiconductor. Yes. And why? Because the biggest market cap company in the world, NVIDIA, here in America, makes the AI chips. They design them, but they are fabricated by Taiwan Semi in Taiwan. Do you see any kind of saber rattling that has gotten louder where the Chinese look like they would be making a more sort of tougher move against Taiwan?
They're certainly talking tougher about Taiwan, and they're having their planes circle Taiwan and their Coast Guard ships circle Taiwan with the
war games, all kinds of stuff.
War games, threatening things that don't really adversely affect Taiwan directly, but psychologically they do. And I think what they also understand is that Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, and I emphasize the word manufacturing company, we don't manufacture a lot of these semiconductors, they do. And they sell them to us and they sell them to China. So China really has no interest in destroying that company either.
So it's a delicate dance they have to make.
It's a delicate dance with a lot of ambiguities in it. And there are ways the Chinese could put pressure on Taiwan to move closer to China, but I don't think they want to do it with some Hamas kind of event where there's a lot of violence back and forth.
Let me ask you a cost-cutting question, because Donald Trump has said he is putting Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy in charge of the Department of Government. You know, he wants to just wipe away a lot of the government spending so that he can then implement his tax cuts that he promised so many different groups. The Pentagon failed its 7th consecutive audit on Friday as the agency was unable to fully account for the more than $824 billion budget. What do you think happens there? Because if you look at what can be cut, it's not that much. There's something like $1.9 trillion after you take out Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, you know, the so-called special untouchable areas.
You're so right, Liz. I think the problem is you cannot simply take a broad brush and cut the budget. Each program has
something's got to give, though. This is ridiculous.
And at some point, there are going to be very difficult programs that are important to one constituency or another, or our national security, or older people, or younger people, where they're going to do this. You can't do this with a sledgehammer. You've got to have proficiency and knowledge of the individual programs to decide what the implications are of cutting. In the case of the Pentagon, you've got wars going on in various parts of the world. You want to project the ability of the United States to exercise influence around the world, and you also need strong deterrence, as the president himself has pointed out. So, and you need to give more money for technological advancement through DARPA and other programs. That costs money. So if we start cutting those programs, we damage our national security. We damage a lot of companies that have positions in various parts of this country and elsewhere. So you have to do this in a very careful way. It can't be a sledgehammer.
Surgical. Well, we'll see. We'll see. I don't know if that's
requires a delicate
Ramaswamy
hand.
and Elon Musk's mandate.
Right.
Bob, great to see you. Thank you very much.